We have a tradition at Michigan. It's called being on Michigan time. And so here, if a class says 9 o'clock, it starts at 9:10, or 10 o'clock, it's 10:10. So we're splitting the difference a little bit by starting at 9:05 or 9:06. But I wanted to welcome you here to Ann Arbor and to the University of Michigan and to LASI. It's our first here at the University of Michigan. There have been 2 previous LASIs. The first one was at Stanford 3 years ago, and then it was at Harvard 2 years ago. We skipped a year. I won't tell you what institution dropped the ball. But I said I wouldn't tell you. And so we're here at Michigan, and we're thrilled to be hosting this year and to have you all here joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have everybody here at the University of Michigan. You can see we've arranged for you typical Michigan weather. We also have scheduled outside an outdoor festival, which includes beer garden and movies shown after dark, like we always do for conferences here.
Yeah, and the movie outside is free. So the beer garden is not free. For those of you, it was a rude shock that you can't bring your coffee in here. I'm sorry, but now you know. So for tomorrow morning and Wednesday morning, you'll have to get your coffee a little earlier and down it before the hour. I think we have only a couple just quick housekeeping items. I want to bring your attention to the fact that we're not the only LASI happening. Currently, there are 2 others, the LASI in New York and the LASI in Atlanta, that are going on these dates. And in fact, you see on the schedule for tomorrow morning and Wednesday morning from 9 to 9:15, we're having a short report. We're going to try to Skype those leads in or Google Hangout or somehow get them on screen here for this morning. To tell us what's been going on at their locals. There is also a discussion space, which is created, and hopefully to get some discussion going between the LASIs. So feel free to find that, open it up, and of course you're welcome to tweet and other social media things about the event. That would be great. Solar would appreciate it. And I think it'll be fun to see what people are thinking as the 3 days go along. I think that was the housekeeping that I had.
Sounds good.
For this morning. So without further ado, we'll get started with the program. Our first speaker this morning are welcome remarks from James Hilton. James, come on up. James is he received his BA in psychology from the University of Texas and a PhD in social psychology from Princeton. His scholarly research published extensively in areas of information technology, policy, person perception, stereotypes, and psychology of suspicion. That was back in the days when he was a psychologist. Since then, and I did want to note that he was awarded an Arthur Thurnau professorship, which at Michigan is awarded to tenured faculty who have made outstanding contributions to undergrad education, something that we all care about. So I'm happy to point out that James is an award-winning teacher as well. He went to Virginia for a couple of years where he was a vice president and chief information officer, and then he came back to Michigan. We hired him back, got him back here, where he is the dean of libraries, and relevant to us, particularly today, he's the vice provost for digital education and innovation, where he leads one of the world's largest and most innovative library systems and spearheads the development of campus-wide strategies, policies, and programs around educational technology. So without further ado, I'll turn you over to James.
Great. Thank you. Good morning. So welcome to Michigan, and actually it's like this 10 months out of the year. The beer garden is only open 6 months out of the year, but the weather 10 months just like this, perfect. So I'm just going to read a few remarks to sort of get you, I hope, energized for the conference a little bit. Learning analytics at Michigan, it's safe to say, is enormous. Over the last 5 years, Michigan has made institutional commitments to this work that I think is truly extraordinary. If I added up over the last 5 years, I think Michigan has committed something like $18 million to support learning analytics in various forms. Things like in 2011, the start of the SLAM series, Student Learning and Analytics at Michigan, the launch of the Learning Analytics Task Force in 2012, and that in turn launched the development of some learning analytics applications, including Student Explorer, Gradecraft, and eCoach. The creation of the Office of Digital Education and Innovation in 2013, leading the launch of Unison, and for those of you who want to know what Unison is, it's really a multi-institutional collaboration aimed at providing shared infrastructure across research universities with one of its key intentions being building the world's largest learning laboratory. So take all this shared infrastructure and the data exhaust that comes from it and use it to answer questions that no single campus can answer because of the size of the populations. The creation of the Digital Innovation Greenhouse in 2015, third century grants to both Gradecraft and MRite, two $1.25 million research grants for learning analytics just awarded by the Michigan Institute for Data Science, one of those being led by Radha Mihalcia, and the other being led by Stephanie Teasley, who I'll also note is the president-elect of the Society for Learning Analytics Research, SOLAR. So congratulations, Stephanie. And so the bottom line is Michigan's pretty doubled down on learning analytics. And to be clear, we recognize it's still very much early days. I think it's safe to say there's often more hype than signal. There are companies that are willing to sell you really something that's a little more than snake oil and call it predictive analytics. But used well, learning analytics have the power to address some of the most vexing challenges facing higher education. So literally last week, as I was thinking about this event, a faculty member came to my office to tell me about some of his work and experiences in the classroom using tools he's developed that allow him to get a more fine-grained sense of how students approach lecture, study, and practice. Tapping the data exhaust of the learning management system, an e-reader tool, a video player, and a slide annotation tool, he told me that he believes he is now able to identify with 80% accuracy which students will fail his class by the second week of class, as opposed to the 14th week of class. He said he hasn't figured out yet how to alter their trajectory, but identifying them is the first step on that. Now, his claims await peer review, replication, and a lot of further research, but directionally it's clear. Learning analytics has the potential to transform education, especially at large research institutions. It fits with our culture. Essentially, it's about taking a translational approach. If it were medicine, we'd say it's bench to bedside. A translational approach to learning, teaching and learning as a clinical enterprise. And it's vital that we embrace this approach. Higher education is at a critical moment. We have, for the most part, lost control of the narrative. The vision of a rich education that enlightens, enriches, and transforms lives has been largely replaced in the public discourse with a view of education that focuses narrowly and almost exclusively on the relationship between education and occupation, actually education and starting income, between college and jobs. Now, to be sure, jobs are important, but college should be about much more than that. It's about introducing habits of mind. It's about giving students tools of reflection and analysis. It is still fundamentally about enlightenment, about developing ways of looking into the dark recesses of what we don't know and what we might fear. It's about fearless inquisitiveness. We all believe this. We know this. The problem is that much of our belief and knowledge, when it comes to educational outcomes, is more faith-based than evidential, right? We know we transformed lives because we just know we transform lives. Just look around. Learning analytics gives us tools to move away from faith-based assertions to knowledge grounded in evidence. It gives us the power to create education pathways that work for an increasingly diverse set of students with wide-ranging and ever-changing interests, to personalize education at scale, particularly at large research universities where the opportunity to drown in our scale is ever present. Learning analytics ignites passions grounded in evidence to help reframe and refocus our conceptions of the purposes, successes, and failures of education. You are at the vanguard of this movement. And the work, at least by my definition, really does constitute holy work. It's both noble and transformative. Thank you for doing this. Enjoy the conference, work hard, change the world.
Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dragan Gasevic, who is the president of SOLAR. I want to note that SOLAR is the professional organization hosting this meeting, the Society for Learning Analytics Research. And it's my pleasure to have the president here at our meeting. Dragan, just a few words about him. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of Belgrade. And his research includes learning analytics, of course, self-regulated learning, technology-enhanced learning, semantic technologies, and service-oriented architectures. Currently, he's a professor and chair in learning analytics and information at the School of Informatics at the University of Edinburgh, where he helped host the recent Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference, which was a great time. I encourage you to come to the one next year. So what else is there to say? Dragan, take it.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. It's my pleasure to be here and welcome you to LASI. I want to start this by thanking very much to Tim and Stephanie for putting together this event. I've been involved in the organization of a couple of LASIs in the past, Stanford and Harvard in 2013 and 14, and I understand how really it is difficult and how much work there is to just put together so many different moving targets. While organizing a conference is one level of complexity, organizing LASI is slightly different because in a way, with a conference, you don't control the schedule, but rather you ask people what you would like to present. But with a LASI, you really kind of need to put a lot of work trying to coordinate what's going to be a workshop, what's going to be a panel, and then which of these things will go which day, etc. So I want to thank you very much for putting together this event and for volunteering to organize LASI here. For all of you who are not perhaps familiar with SOLAR, I would like to say a couple of maybe words about SOLAR, the organization that is behind LASI. That basically organization was informally set up in 2011, and I think we kind of started to build a very high profile in establishing the organization, although we were not formally incorporated. So I think we pulled a pretty good kind of thing within like a couple of years, and then we eventually realized, oh crap, we are doing pretty well and we are growing, but we are not having any kind of formal incorporation. So we had to do that, and then eventually a group of us, including George Siemens, Shane Dawson, Simon Buckingham, and Caroline Haytrand-Waite. Some of them are here. I believe Caroline and George are here, and Simon and Shane are not. We pretty much started working on the first organization, which was incorporated originally in Canada. And then from that point on, we realized we cannot run the organization anymore as a dictatorship, but rather we need to kind of enter the era of democracy. And that's when it was the time when we started actually having a proper membership structure, so that all of you, I believe, who are today here are SOLAR members. You all can stand for election and be elected members of the SOLAR executive. Our SOLAR executive has 12 members. I believe a majority of us are here. Could you, SOLAR executives, please raise your hands so that people can identify? So if you have anything to basically say, suggest, or would like to discuss with respect to SOLAR, please talk to them. Also, if you have any compliments about SOLAR, please talk to them. If you have any kind of negative comments, then George Siemens, previous president, he's going to accept all of them, so he's happy. So with respect to that, SOLAR has been established really on the recognized need that many people are seeing lots of potential with the use of data. So there have been many people, when we announced the first LAC conference, and it was happening in July, I believe, or August 2010, and we basically announced that conference, and many people showed up, oh, goodness, I'm doing this, but I didn't really know that I was doing learning analytics because we were not using the same name, although we were using data. So the whole idea was to create a space, shared space for people who are coming from different disciplines computer science, education, psychology, sociology, even anthropology, and many other relevant disciplines who are involved into the field of learning analytics. And that's how we start. But the other critical point for Solar has always been developmental as well. And from that developmental perspective, we wanted to look into the importance of developing the field, but also developing those who are going to be future leaders of the field, and those are our doctoral students. And this is why we have always supported doctoral students to attend our events. I'm very pleased as well that this year that panned out, and I think there are several of you who are supported through these different types of scholarships that the society supports. This year, we had a very unfortunate event that we lost our dear colleague, Eric Duval, who after a long fight with cancer eventually passed away in just before the conference in March this year. And in memory of Eric Duval's contribution to the field, we set up Eric Duval scholarships, and those scholarships are those that support the students who are here. So I'm very pleased at least that Eric's big contribution to the field will be also recognized and will be remembered for many years to come through our doctoral students who are going to be next leaders of the field. And I can't see better example than Eric to basically be that kind of role model that can help and inform many of the students. I would like also to say a couple of things about the field of learning analytics. Field of learning analytics, I'm sure many of you know the formal definition that we kind of after lots of thinking and lots of debate in 2010, well, it was really more like, oh, we have like a day before we announce the call for paper, so we need to define the field. And so we define that basically as so the learning analytics as the field is formally defined as the data collection, measurement, analysis, and reporting about learners and their contexts. And that's really the what part, but I think why part of the definition is more important. The why part is that why we are doing learning analytics, and there are two critical components. First one is to understand learning, and the other one is to optimize learning and the environments in which learning occurs. So I'd like also to draw lots of attention here with respect to understanding of learners. Learners are not decoupled from their contexts, and that's been always a holistic view that the field of learning analytics had, and always wanted to see learners in the context of different social structures, different power structures, also different instructional designs, but also different socio-demographic and other cultural issues that are quite important in shaping our learning experiences. And that's why we always had that emphasis. And that emphasis also about the holistic approach to learning resulted in the field of learning analytics to be something which I believe George initially pointed out to be a bricolage field. Which builds also around connections to amplify basically the impact. And that's why when many people come to our different types of events, they also get quite surprised because they think they are a minority in terms of expecting, well, perhaps because we are talking about data, will be dominated by computer scientists. I don't think we have that type of a problem. I think we are having a creative mix of many diverse groups. I think we are also getting to the point as a field that we are also getting high level of maturity. And that high level of maturity was, I think, best reflected in our first event this year, and that's our major event, annual event. That's the Learning Analytics Conference, LAC, which we had a pleasure to host in Edinburgh. Also, we had a pleasure to feature nice Scottish weather with all 3 seasons in a single hour. I'm emphasizing 3 seasons because summer doesn't exist in Scotland, even though not available in the vocabulary. So we basically had a pleasure to host many of you, and I recognize many faces here in the audience. The conference, and that basically is a clear indicator as well where a field is heading. The conference was almost doubled in terms of the number of submissions that we received, but also even in terms of the participants that were attending the conference. That's a clear indicator that there is something good happening here, something important happening here, but at the same time also in terms of the quality of submissions, we saw this year a significant growth as well. So while some of the early submissions to our conferences and different events were fairly theoretical and also coming from different conceptual ideas, this this year we could see quite substantial growth in the theoretical foundations of different types of papers. We also could see significant growth in the more robust types of studies. And another important thing, while for the development of the first few conferences in the field was important, we had short papers, which were kind of throwing out many important ideas and preliminary work. We saw this year that reviewers were actually more favorable about full papers, which reported full-fledged studies which went through a very rigorous process. While short papers, they expected to be really creative and conceptually to increase current understanding of what we are thinking about in a way that we cannot just go and repeat all saying why data is important. Rather, we need to become very critical, very innovative, and also very rigorous in our methods. And so that's basically what I want to say about that's the major event that we have. And the other thing which we always felt in the society is that we would like to have an important venue where we can publish our rigorous work. And so in addition to LASI, which is our annual event, last year that annual event didn't happen as centrally as this one. Rather, we basically just had LASI locals. And we are trying to always, and we've been always having these LASI locals for every year. But in addition to LASI locals, we also have another type of event that Solar supports, and those are solar flares. I'm actually thinking that while solar flares were originally the way how we can organize different regional events, in a way solar flares are somehow not being as successful as LASI, and in a way I think LASI's took over that space. But I mean, if you are ever interested in organize a small regional event that you would like to share some of the ideas, and especially practitioner-focused events, then solar flares are something that Solar is always happy to work with you. And so please just come to us. Javier Ochoa, who is also here in the audience, he is our events chair, and he is happy to basically have a chat with you, but of course, all of us. But the final thing that we have with Society for Learning Analytics Research, and I think it's quite important element for the development of any field, is the journal. And that's the Journal of Learning Analytics. We are now in the third year. One other important thing is while initially we had 3 editors, Shane Dawson, Phil Long, and myself, this year we are also democratizing the journal as well, and we've been pleased that we just appointed 3 new editors who will start taking gradually over the journal from July. So the first one is Arnon Haratsevich, who has been actually more between learning sciences and educational data mining, but we are very pleased that we can connect with other communities and also have an individual who is not necessarily just a central member of Solar and our events, but rather we can also build these bridges. The other couple of individuals who are the new editors is Javier Ochoa and Alyssa Wise. Those are the long-standing members of the society and also big contributors to the field development. So those are some of the critical points that I want to say about the field. Without really taking much of your time, I would like you to enjoy the next 3 days. Look forward to having a pleasure to interact with all of you and enjoy Michigan. Thanks.
Okay. The graduate students, you've had a little brief background on some of the legacy that we have from one of our departed members of the Solar, and you're here in the audience. We were pleased to be able to pass out these scholarships, and I warned you ahead that we would have these presentations. 1 minute, just come on up, have a little line right here. And let's have a word from you about what your research is. So this is a way for the rest of you to see who these doctoral students are and essentially to have a conversation starter with them. And hopefully maybe you have some ideas for them. Maybe in the future you might have a position for them. But it's a way to get to know who they are and what they're about. We have more than this. Don't be shy, I warned you. Nothing's free. And if you are a grad student too who's here who didn't apply for a scholarship, maybe you found out too late or you had generous funding from an advisor, you are also welcome to stand up here and tell us who you are, identify yourself as a graduate student, and tell us a few words. I'm not going to set the timer. We did this at the lightning talks, but I bet none of you are going to run on, right? So I'll yank you off if you do, but Yeah, just like, come on. So come on up, introduce yourself, and just say a few words about your work and what you're doing.
All right, hello guys and ladies and gentlemen. My name is AJ Womack. I'm at the University of Missouri. I'm a first-year grad student, actually. So I'm working on Mission Hydrocide, which is a video game that teaches middle schoolers water systems. And I'm here because I'm really interested to see the logs, the gaming logs that come from that, how we can actually figure out what the students are learning and how they're learning it, and then figuring out best methods to actually teach those ideas. So really interested in that. Also really interested in looking at like GameCraft. I was really looking into that. I saw, you're somewhere in the audience. Yeah. Fishman, where are you
Barry
at?
Fishman.
Yeah, he's around here somewhere. I saw him walk in. And talking to him, I'm really interested to see how we, as science education, I'm a science education PhD student. Sorry.
Uh-oh,
Anyway,
yeah, you're getting close.
I'm getting close, yeah. So anyway, just looking at how we can actually, what pedagogical methods can actually be used and be applied with that knowledge from the learning analytics. All right, I'll shut
Great.
up. All right.
Thank you, AJ.
Hi, my name is Danielle Haygood. I'm a third-year PhD student at UC Davis, and I'm so excited to be here because as I've been developing my dissertation proposal, I've been citing all of these papers, and then I see faces, and I'm like, oh, I know that. I'm working right now on my proposal, which is looking at non-cognitive factors, which is somewhat of a contentious term, especially motivation and engagement. But how do you do learning analytics in a classroom? So using the digital exhaust produced from natural learning activities in middle school classrooms, and it's quite challenging. In the past, I've worked with Fitbits and game log data, and also I've been exploring doing some structural equation modeling trees to do model search in survey development.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, for those who don't know me, I'm Zach Waters. I'm a first year doctoral student from Queensland University of Technology in Australia. So I've been working on the CLA toolkit for Cursor Kiddo, which some people might know, some may not, which is basically a software suite to import in a lot of data from teachers who prefer to teach out in the open, so like social media, content authoring tools and whatnot. It's still an active development. It could get better, but yeah. So what particularly interests me about learning analytics is that I think it could be much more than simply reporting and measuring data, but more it could serve as a catalyst for creating better technologies to allow those who might not otherwise have the opportunity to get an education. Particularly, I'm focusing for my doctoral thesis on feedback and how we could, some students need more feedback than others, and how we could use that to sort of transition and get them through their course of study.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome,
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Benji Xie. I did my undergrad and master's, just completed my master's in computer science at MIT. So for those, I guess, regarding last year's LASI, I found out about that today. I'm very sorry. I hope we can still be friends. And I'm an incoming PhD student in information science at the University of Washington, Seattle. I think my high-level research question is how do people learn computation in these online informal environments outside of the classroom and sometimes without having any formal instruction at all. The past 3 years I've been researching with MIT App Inventor, which is a web platform that uses a blocks language and a drag and drop interface to enable the creation of mobile apps. So to date we have, I think it's nearing 5 million people from almost 200 countries have created something near 16 million apps with App Inventor, and I was really interested in using data being what the projects people created to understand how creating apps with App Inventor actually translates to learning computational concepts. And tying this all back to learning analytics, my background again is in CS, so it's really using HCI and machine learning techniques to do, I think, what James Hilton really said really well, which was how to personalize learning at scale.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Qing Huang. I'm from La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm 1 year into the learning analytics field. My research topic is about using data-driven approach to reduce student attrition. So currently I am considering to look into different stages of student life cycle to explore the reasons for student attrition and what are the collections of at-risk student profiles so that we can develop customized intervention to address the attrition with regarding to different stages of the student life cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Edward Pagorski and I'm a doctoral student at Durham University in the UK. And it's a pleasure to be here and meet great people and enjoy the weather, especially after England. And my doctoral thesis is I'm using learning analytics to group students according to their performance in online course for studying English as a second language, with particular focus on IELTS, which is a British equivalent to TOEFL exam. And I'm interested to group students according to their performance and identify best students with good progress and apply and also identify students at risk and apply digital change behavior interventions for students at risk and analyze to which extent the behavior change interventions help them to achieve better scores and better results. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sunmi Lee. I'm from Teachers College, Columbia University, majoring learning ethics. Actually, I'm a master's student right now, but I'm looking forward to be a doctorate student from next year. What is it? I used to work in United Nations, so we have, that's why I major learning ethics, because we have so many data wandering around in the world, and I want to use this data to improve students' learning outcome, but I don't know how to do it, but try to learn as much as possible. And also, like, I realized that while I was learning, we don't have many learning ethics community in Asia right now. So I want to be one of the pioneer or second generation to make a community over there. Lastly, actually, even though my major is learning ethics, I decided to come here because I was kind of lost nowadays because everyone was defining learning ethics differently. So I don't know what is the main definition of the learning ethics. I hopefully learn from this summer institute. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, thank you, Stephanie and Tim, and the others planning this event. My name is Brandon Patterson. I'm actually from here, University of Michigan. I'm studying education and information. And on top of my studies, I work for the School of Social Work. And we send students abroad to do independent studies, and each comes with a different level of cultural competency and implicit skills that help them in the field. And so what my project is to partner with different units on campus, including the School of Information, School of Engineering, Library, Ginsberg Service Learning Center, and the Provost Office of Global Engaged Learning to develop different resources and learning modules that can target the unique needs of students engaging in community work. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Bodley, and I am a hopefully final year PhD student. Hoping to graduate in April of next year, so I'll be looking for faculty jobs. My dissertation is on learning analytics dashboards, specifically looking at how we can increase student use of those dashboards. So it's been a design-based research project, and over the course of 3 semesters, we've identified a number of factors that have increased or decreased student use of these tools. We've also looked at adopting interoperability standards in order to facilitate increased data collection in online environments. And Our dashboards up to this point have mostly been descriptive, but using various data mining methodologies, we're moving into the predictive realm. And yeah, I think
Thank you.
that's everything.
Thank you.
Howdy. I'm Xu Junji. I'm from Texas A&M University. I'm third PhD student in language and literacy. Every day, I mean, most of the time, I do statistical modeling analysis on the reading development. Currently, I work on my dissertation. My dissertation is to use the latent variable modeling to identify or classify the home literacy environment and impact on early readers, on early reading development and predict their later on development levels. And also interesting, use the predict modeling to identify the at-risk readers. So that's why I came here, because I found a workshop topics really match my topic. I just have a little bit knowledge about learning analytics. 3 years ago, I guess, I took a MOOC course called Big Data in Education from Ron Baker Teachers College at Columbia University. From that time, I just think, okay, probably this is a field I probably go forward to for my future careers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nayan Ten. I'm from University of Missouri. I'm a graduate student in science education. And I think I am new for the learning analytics, this new area. And I just know this area from your talk in our university. So, and the field is very interesting, and attend this summer institute and want to know and learn more about learning analytics. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ping Wang, and I come from University of Nevada at Reno. And I'm a doctoral student and of education program, and my area is learning and technology. My background is I have master in applied mathematics with an emphasis of statistics. So my doctoral this is just my second year, so I haven't learned too much thing about my dissertation for the future yet. So just prepare for the basic courses. But I do have strong interest in learning technology and the data analysis based on my background as well. And so we all know the online environment dramatically increased in the college and university setting. So we have more and more data. So my interest is not only collect those data and analyze those data. I think what we can do in the future is we retrieve more valuable information and a more valuable pattern hiding behind those data. And we don't want not only increase the teaching and the learning, we also want to do something from the academic support perspective to advance our education in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ogechi, and I'm a master's student in the University of Edinburgh. And my dissertation topic is on, I'm actually working in a team to build a platform for real-time analytics for online courses. I got interested in the problem because I think I'm one of those people who drops out of the online courses I register for. And I'm also interested in online education for for countries in Africa, especially my country, Nigeria. I'm here at the LASI, because I'm interested in doing my PhD in learning analytics, and I'm looking forward to getting someone who's going to supervise me. Yeah, so I'm open to talking to everyone, and yeah, I'm looking forward to a great time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, I am Binchol Kim. I'm the third year doctoral student in information science from Drexel University. And for my master and for the first year of my doctoral study, I have done data mining, and I just switched to learning science. And I am interested in learning analytics / computing education in the wild. So I'm very happy to see the incoming doctoral student interested in computing education in the wild. And now I am doing an internship at Mozilla because they are having a bunch of data set on their online web editor. So I am working on web development / learning analytics right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. My name is Carl. I'm an incoming doctoral student at the School of Information. My advisor is standing up here. I have experience working with learning management systems, and I'm very much interested in learning more about learning analytics. Right now, I'm working my way through the beginning of the Journal of Learning Analytics, so if I run into you and I see your name and I notice that you wrote an article, I'm gonna get excited to talk to you about it, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Lang. I'm an incoming master's student at the School of Information and plan to have a tailored specialization at educational technology because I'm interested in how to use data analytics in the educational sector and make education more accessible to students, especially underserved students. And I'm also planning to do a master thesis in my second year, and my proposal is to potentially analyze the content and in MOOC discussion forums. And so that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Heru Praptono. I'm from Institute for Adaptive and Neural Computation, School of Informatics, the University of Edinburgh. Currently, I'm working with Dragan Gasevic and Charles Hutton. I'd like to advance the recurrent neural network for student interactions in MOOCs and also the knowledge tracing. Thank you. Previously, I work in image processing and machine learning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Amin. I'm from the University of Wisconsin. I'm a PhD student. I guess we still have 10 minutes. I can't take them all.
No.
Okay.
No, you can't.
So I'm actually at vivid buoyant because I'm thinking before joining UW, I was teaching a programming course, and I thought of using the already existing social media like Facebook, Twitter, and maybe going chasing students where they are existing and trying to pop these announcements, like the due dates of the course. Now, I'm thinking of analyzing whether using the already existing platform in a classroom, is it effective or not? So I'm here just to know, to dive into the effective of using the already existing platform in teaching. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think you can see one of the reasons why I love Solar. First of all, obviously it's very international. Some of you came from very far away to be here, and I think that's very exciting and shows a commitment to this fairly new field. And also the diversity. You can hear the diversity in methodologies, which of course is one thing we're focusing on here this year, on the diversity of who is defined as a student or a learner in this community. I was pleased to hear some people are doing work in K-12. I think Solar, a lot of the research that gets presented at LAC, we tend to be fairly focused on higher education because, frankly, that data is a lot easier to get than getting into public schools and working with children. But I think that's a problem that many of you are working on and getting access to that data too, because we know that learning doesn't start in higher education. We also know that learning doesn't end when students leave our institutions of higher education. So I'm really excited that we have such a diverse and wonderful group. And I'm really excited that we have so many doctoral students here, because really this is one of the main motivations for holding the LASIs, is really developing the future of the field. And so someday, one of you who are just up here this morning may be the person that the next student's like, oh my God, you know who's here? I gotta go talk to them. That could be you in a few years. So I wish you all success on your thesis, and I hope that you find your experience here valuable and helpful. Earlier we raised hands for those of us who are in solar and been involved in solar. Feel free, as you were invited to earlier, to reach out to us for any way we can help you feel more comfortable in this community. So I think that's all that we had on the program for this morning, and we'll take a break and come back here for our first keynote, which I'm very excited for you to hear. We are a little Michigan-centric on the speakers at LASI. It was easy for us to do that, and also since you've never been here before, these are people that we wanted you to hear who are here at Michigan, and also between us together in this room, these are some people we wanted our colleagues to know what their connection to learning analytics could be, so it can work both ways. We have a break outside, as was the case this morning. You can't bring anything but water back into this room, so please enjoy the break out there, and we'll meet back here at 10:30. Thank you.
Good morning. So my name's Tim McKay, and I'm a professor of physics, astronomy, and education here at the University of Michigan. I've been here since 1995. During most of my career, I worked on big data cosmology, but about 6 or 8 years ago, I began realizing how much data we had about students on this campus and started to do work in learning analytics, to work with Stephanie and others here at Michigan on these topics. So it's also my pleasure to welcome you all here for LASI. I'm here to introduce our first plenary speaker for the series, my colleague Jason Owen Smith. So Jason is a professor of sociology. He's also the Barger Leadership Institute Professor of Organizational Studies and a research professor in the Institute for Social Research Survey Research Center. He received a master's and a PhD degree in sociology from the University of Arizona and his BA in sociology and philosophy from the New College in Florida. Jason's research focuses on economic sociology and organizational theory. He uses a lot of techniques from network theory and does work in the sociology of science and technology as well as research methods. He directs right now an institute here on campus called the Barger Leadership Institute. He's also the executive director of what he's going to tell you about here, the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science. Now, all that sounds great, the usual introductory stuff that you get in talks like this, but I want to say that more than anything, what Jason is a person who makes things happen, all right? To create this iris that he's going to tell you about, he had to convince more than 20 major research universities to share highly sensitive details about every research expenditure that they make. This is exactly the kind of information that universities never, ever share. And I should note that I'm using the past tense here because Jason's actually already done this. The data is already supporting studies which help to advance our understanding of the U.S. national research enterprise, showing us how research universities fuel economic activity and develop human resources. So in the last couple of years, I've begun to work with Jason in an effort to more fully realize the image of what we know about research universities. The IRIS work that's already taken place tells us a lot about the research mission of research universities. We hope to bring together educational data that would let us see a whole portrait of what it is research universities do. And Jason's going to tell you about that now. Please join me in welcoming Jason Owen Smith.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for having me. I'm going to start my little timer in the hopes that I can discipline myself to actually finish on time and leave room for questions. Whenever I hear someone introduce me like Tim, I think, man, that guy sounds busy. So it's a pleasure to be here today and to have a chance to talk to what for me is a new audience about a project that we've been working on. It's a big collective project for quite a while. And I want to start, before I dive into the talk, by saying, please bear with me. I'm going to start by talking about the research function of universities, but I'm very quickly going to transition, after I kind of lay the groundwork, to telling you about a platform for data sharing, a data repository that we're building that I think has real and interesting implications for future directions in learning analytics. And I'll sort of leave it there, except to say that the goal of the work that I'm doing, the work that I'm doing with Tim and others here and on other campuses, is not just to think about the economic impact of science, but really to be able to develop the capacity to have a research-based understanding of the public value of higher education institutions. And obviously, without any question, the learning and teaching and student roles of institutions like this are a key part of the story. So, with that said, what am I going to do today? Oh no, I guess I'm going to be podium bound. Unless, oh no, I just seem to have turned this off. There we go. So I'm going to start with a quick case study just to sensitize you to the kinds of things that I think about. I'm then going to introduce IRIS, the Institute for Research on Innovation in Science, and talk about the model of data sharing that underpins this. Give you two examples of recent research that we've been doing in IRIS that I think bear on your interests. One about the career outcomes of doctoral students, one about persistence of undergraduates in STEM as a function of research experience. The first is finished, the latter is a work in progress, and so comments, both substantive and otherwise, are very, very appreciated. I should note that I was joking with Tim that I hope I don't provide an example of the kind of loopy learning analytics that are next on the agenda. But if I happen to, I would also appreciate it if you tell me now, rather than when one of you gets a paper on this as a reviewer. And then I'll conclude by sort of just sketching some ideas about how we might use this kind of platform, whether this one or this is a model, as a way to think about moving forward on sharing learning data to give us some interesting traction on questions that we might not have been able to answer otherwise. So, the case study. When I start talking about the research function of universities, I begin by noting that universities have a problem. In 2014, the US universities spent about $210 for every man, woman, and child in the country on research done on our campuses. And we make these investments, arguably, going all the way back to the post-war era, founding of the NSF in 1952, with the idea that investing in academic research increases the store of human knowledge and improves, basically, us, but also is an investment that largely public funds make in order to improve down the road the health, wealth, and well-being of our nation, the world. Universities, being recorded, so I'll say it gently, suck at explaining exactly how that happens. And that means that in a time of retrenchment, budgetary difficulties, distrust of science, distrust of the academy, questions about the business model of universities entirely, we are in trouble if we can't do more to explain what we do. And I think that holds true for learning as well. So you can pick up and translate a lot of what I'm going to say from research to learning with important caveats, and I want to hear about those from you. So, we don't know how to do this, but there's an answer about how you might do it out there. So one answer is you treat R&D funding like any other straightforward investment, and you just prioritize the really important stuff. Sounds like a good example. I'm not making it up. This is a snippet of a letter from Senator Tom Coburn, then a senator, to Subra Suresh, then the director of the NSF, dated March 12, 2013, in which he says, even with a smaller budget, we can increase our investments in transformative science and basic research by simply setting priorities and better managing the resources available. While the scientific mind seeks to understand all aspects of the world around us, some research topics are simply more likely to contribute to truly meaningful discoveries or knowledge. Implication, we know what those are. Let's pick them. Let's invest in them. Everything else can die on the vine. This is not that different than a governor of Florida saying, we don't need any more anthropologists. So let's take this seriously for a second. Let's imagine that this is actually how we should go. I think it's not, but here's perhaps the greatest single example recently of that people trot out for this kind of thinking. So, in 1994, a $4.5 million grant was made to Stanford universities for something called the Stanford Digital Libraries Project. The Stanford Digital Libraries Project, among other things, hired this guy as a graduate student. Anybody know who this guy is? This is Larry Page. This is Sergey Brin. Sergey, or maybe I have them reversed, I always get them confused. Sergey was funded by an NSF graduate fellowship and also worked on the project. These two guys were working on a computer science project during their PhD program at Stanford, which led them, among other things, to develop something called PageRank. PageRank is the core algorithm that Google used and uses in order to do the kinds of search that we all know and love. The reason that you can zone out of my discussion right now and find cute cat pictures on your phone is PageRank. Right? All the way back to this. And this patent, this is a snapshot of the front page of the relevant patent, cites this grant and says, because this research was initially funded by this grant, the federal government has certain rights. This patent was owned by Stanford, where the work was done, licensed to Google when it was started up. Google's market cap, last time I checked, was about $500 million, which means if you do the math, this is about 118,000% return on investment, which is pretty good. But the story's a little bit more complicated than that. And it's complicated for two reasons. One, there's this guy. Does anybody know who this guy is? This is a guy named Scott Hassan. Scott Hassan was also a doctoral student at Stanford working on this project, who wasn't part of the patent. And you'll note also that Sergey Brin's name isn't on the patent. Larry Page is the only inventor, even though they co-authored a paper about it before this. Right. This guy, Scott Hassan, was hired by Page and Brin to initially do the real implementation of Google's search algorithm, because apparently neither Page nor Brin were particularly good at doing the kind of coding that was necessary to allow real traffic, and they kept crashing the Stanford servers and couldn't scale. So this guy's basically Google employee number 3, and getting Google to work required him. He's now a very, very well-off venture capitalist, angel investor, and serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. But this suggests that in order to really think about this triangle of activity, we also need to get a handle on who the students are who are working and where they go. The other thing that we need to think about is this. And you can't really read these, but take my word for it. This is what people like me call non-patent prior art. Citations from a patent to pieces of scholarship that are relevant to the invention you're claiming. Right? In this case, those citations are almost entirely to academic papers, which means that Google's thing didn't just spring fully formed out of smart graduate students on a $4.5 million NSF grant. It built on a wide range of existing knowledge, something that mostly was produced by universities. So if we think about those things, that complicates the story and makes it harder to imagine a kind of Tom Coburn, or by extension, who's the governor of Florida? I forget. Explanation of why anthropology, or why sociology for that matter, that requires a different approach to data. So think in these terms. Between 1970 and 1997, the National Science Foundation made about $52 billion in grants. We don't know how many there were. That's not a number that can be extracted by the National Science Foundation or by us, because it's very complicated, but we know this is about the order of magnitude. Excuse me. These are 5 of them. So, anybody have a sense of what these might have in common? The answer is every single one of these grants is acknowledged in a publication cited in Google's patent. So if we had to think about what it was that set the stage for Google PageRank, it's not too much removed to say that all of this funding, which goes back more than 30 years across a number of different disciplines, was essential. It's 1 degree removed from the actual PageRank patent that we want to see. And so we need to understand how these things cohere and build and how people move across projects over careers and between universities. So 6 grants, now for about $10.5 million. There were others. These are just the NSF, which is where the plurality came from. It's also NSF, Department of the Navy, a few corporations. So there's a lot of work underpinning this. But 6 grants for about 0.02% of total NSF obligations, very small needle in a very big haystack, funded over 30 years in at least 5 different fields to organizations spread across the country, set the groundwork for Google. Which means that we need a different way to think about how you search for that needle in a haystack if we want to take Senator Coburn seriously. Ooh, I went too fast. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but a couple more things that explain what goes on. So one of my favorites, one of those grants is a sociology grant to a well-known Marxist to study how interlocking corporate directorships create an intractable power elite that captures the state and renders us all, essentially slaves. It was funded in 1974, and as a result of that funding, it hired this guy as a graduate student. This guy's my colleague in sociology here, Mark Mizruki. In 1986, Mark, along with Michael Schwartz, the PI on the grant, co-authored with a few other graduate students a tasty little paper called something like Methods for the Decomposition of Eigenvector Centrality Measures, which appeared in a small journal called Sociological Theory and promptly sunk beneath the waves, or at least mostly. It's very used by specialists like myself. But it got cited in the PageRank patent because it solved a mathematical problem for Google of figuring out exactly what proportion of one's profile was a result of one's own citations as opposed to the result of being linked to other things that are highly cited. Right? So the example here is lovely because what it says is that you get to this high technology firm that went public in 2004, but to get there you have to start with a Marxist sociology grant in 1974. The other little piece here that's important to know is that Stanford tried to license this technology. Initially, Page and Brin didn't want to leave Stanford. They wanted to finish their PhDs. So Stanford tried to sell this, and all of the incumbent firms that it reached out to passed. Right? Stanford offered this to Lycos and Excite, and I believe Yahoo, initially for $1 million. And then after 2 of them turned it down for $750,000. And at no time did one of the existing firms buy the rights to this technology, which then later proceeded to destroy them. The message here is that if we want to understand how investments in public sector science lead to the kinds of outcomes like Google, we need to think about people, we need to think about long time horizons, and very, very importantly, we need to really begin to try to understand how we could make these investments, how we can create a situation where we know about as much about what we will need in 30 years as a sociology program officer in 1974 knew about the World Wide Web. So, the challenge for that, and this is a long wind-up to a short pitch, I hope, is that the data to do that simply don't exist. There's been no way to systematically look across multiple universities at the conditions of scientific training and scientific research, the kinds of outcomes and the movements of skilled individuals who are trained in research out into the economy in order to be able to start to develop the kinds of models that we would need to do this. I would argue that the same is true about much of the work that we might want to do about what happens to the students we educate. In other words, I sometimes get asked to give a talk with just one slide, and if I can only use one slide, I use this one, set of equations, then a miracle occurs. We know there's a miracle, but we have no way of knowing what the components of that miracle are. We can't explain it, we can't improve it, we can't talk about what works and what doesn't, and we need to be able to. which means that at the level of thinking about science policy, where I spend my time, and maybe about higher education policy, we're a lot like saying, hey, Hewlett-Packard, Apple, they were founded in garages. If we want more of those kinds of successes, what we should really do is build more garages. That doesn't help us. So, what would help us? The answer, I think, is to build a platform that allows for the secure sharing of microdata and linkage that will allow a research community to have access to the data under appropriate institutional protections in order to begin to build the kind of knowledge base that I think we need in order to actually be able to explain and improve what our institutions do. I'm not going to run through the background, but suffice it to say that we've been working on this for a while. The Institute for Research on Innovation and Science, which I direct, is a membership organization where universities join and share record-level data about their research expenditures, including personally identifiable information, some of it protected by FERPA. We've had to go through lots and lots of negotiations, but we now have more than 40 universities committed to participate and data in the hopper from 22. The eventual goal is to bring in 150, which would cover, in my world, about 93% of all federal R&D expenditures and about 85% of all doctorate grants, which would allow us to do some really interesting stuff. These are the people that I worked with. In formal terms, IRIS is an IRB-approved data repository that we've built that sits here at the University of Michigan in the Institute for Social Research. It's based on this kind of model, the idea that you could make this if you want public investments, doesn't just have to be science, but money flows into universities from all kinds of public sources. It doesn't disappear. Universities use it to do work, essentially to hire people and buy stuff that is necessary to the missions of learning and teaching and discovery. When they hire people and buy stuff, money and other goodies flow out of the university, and they have real and measurable implications immediately on the economy of our nation and our states. But most importantly, unlike, for instance, the work of digging ditches, I don't know if he's here, Paul Courant once told me that, hey, this model, you know, everybody, the federal government could build a pyramid where every university is, and it would have exactly the same economic stimulus impacts. And the answer is, yeah, that's probably true. But building a pyramid doesn't also produce new knowledge, page rank, train skilled people, or create technologies that can flow out of the university. So thinking about our real impact requires not that we think about what the funding is, but that we think about how the work is done and what happens, particularly to the things, where people are key among the things, that the work of the institution produces when they flow out into the economy. In order to do that, we need a bunch of stuff. And so this is kind of the stylized model of what IRIS is, give you a sense. Member institutions, universities who've decided to do this, who've signed our MOU, share their data with us. That data comes in, and it is combined with all of its identifiers into a shared data set that we restrict access to. We're working on a national governance structure now. We use those data to return a bunch of information to the universities that they're interested in for their own reporting and outreach, build reports for them. We also have partner organizations that we call nodes who have access to the identified data through our virtual data enclave in order to improve it by doing things like linking publication information to individual researchers, or cleaning up occupational classifications, which allow us to know how many faculty and students are employed in research. Finally, we take those data and we share them twice a year with a partner. A partner is something that works on these restricted data outside of the data infrastructure we build. In this case, the partner institution is the US Census Bureau, which takes our data, and I'll show you what it's good for, and makes a bunch of linkages at the individual and organizational level to federally protected information they maintain that allows us to see where people go when they leave the university and what the economic effects of hiring them or of being a vendor on a university grant are. We then take the data, de-identify it, and make it available through a secure virtual data enclave that we've built. There's a user agreement. There's a disclosure proofing process, so people can come in, get access to the data, use the data on our systems through the VDI, prepare output that they want to try to publish or present on. We review the output to ensure that no individual or organization is plausibly re-identifiable in it, and then we disclose the output, and people in the research community use it. This also is an environment in which we're building a wiki that allows for shared documentation. So when people are working on the data, they discover bugs, they upload them to the wiki, we converse back and forth, we can improve. This is a mechanism to have a research community work in a shared location that still maintains the institutional protections we need. The Census Bureau, once the data goes into the Census Bureau, it never comes back under federal law, but the Census Bureau also has a mechanism, a set of data enclaves that are small rooms that you have to go badge into to work on a thin client to allow for access to the census-linked data to think about careers and outcomes. So this is IRIS. It's a really interesting model. It's got a lot of moving parts and it's hard to wrap your head around, but this is a way that we've discovered that seems to make many universities comfortable with sharing data, as Tim says, that they rarely, if ever, share, in order for us to do stuff with it that improves the value both for them and for our research community. And I should say the other nice piece of this is that universities are interested enough that they actually pay us. Right? The infrastructure is supported by membership contributions from the universities. So it's something like an NPR model. Right? You send your data in, you get back reports, it's the lovely tote bag, but this stuff, this is all things considered. So what kind of stuff do we produce? This is a first shot. This is a map based on where federal grants are spent on vendor payments. So we get data on every purchase. I get a grant, I need to house rats, I call up Bob's Rat Cages, I buy 100 rat cages, I charge that to my grant, that's a direct cost vendor expenditure. We can see where that thing is and map its location and know how much money flows from the universities around the country. This speaks to the economic stimulus model. And what's interesting is that this is a group of 12 universities in 1 year that spent about $1.3 billion in more than 1,600 counties around the country, with about 47% of that staying in their state, which is something that state legislatures for public universities like ours like to hear. We can also say something about who's paid on these grants. This is really interesting. This is across a group of 9 universities, and I'm just sort of cherry picking, so to give you a sense, these are the people who were paid some wages by research grants over about a 2-year period. There's 75,375 of them, and what's really interesting is that only about 12,500 are faculty. About 18,000 are undergrads based on their job classifications. Another 17,000 are graduate students. More than 20,000 are staff, which means that the production function, the work of research, federally funded research at universities, is driven very heavily, as we know but have never really been able to say, by students. Research is education in this setting, and that raises interesting possibilities both for bridging into the kinds of questions you all might ask, I'll talk about that in a little bit, and also for starting to think about the ways in which the missions of our institutions overlap and cohere and improve each other, or don't, in which case we need to figure that out and make them better. The census data allows us to do all kinds of other things. So there are 2 census data sets. I won't go into huge detail about them, but one of them is called the Longitudinal Business Database. And it's basically a data set that census uses based on IRS tax data to understand every single establishment that pays taxable wages in the US. So for those of you who aren't labor economists, Apple is an organization, a corporation. Your local Apple store is an establishment. So this is an establishment level record of employment, earnings, revenues, all that good stuff. The other is called the LEHD, the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Dataset. And the LEHD is essentially a record of every payment of wages from an establishment to an individual. It also is based on IRS W-2 data and on state-level unemployment insurance data. And so these 2 things together allow us in principle to see the careers of individuals who were paid on research and to see the economic impact for organizations. Here's some examples. I won't spend time. This is how we link. So, a very simple first question, something we could never answer before. Where do people who were employed in research, remember the vast majority of them are students of one sort or another, get jobs when they leave the university? This is something we answer with the LEHD. So this is the percentage of people by two-digit NAICS code from universities who got jobs in these industries. This is the national percentage of people employed in these industries based on census data. The yellow bars are at the two-digit level where universities are overrepresented. So people who got jobs after leaving universities having been employed in research overwhelmingly went into manufacturing, professional, scientific, and technical services, and healthcare and social assistance. That's very cool. That's a good thing to be able to say. And it kind of meets with some of our expectations. We can dive a little bit deeper. So it's not just manufacturing, it's computer and electronic manufacturing. It's not just professional, scientific, and technical services, it's computer systems design, management, scientific, and technical consulting, et cetera, et cetera. We could, in principle, go all the way down to six-digit NAICS codes, but privacy protections prevent us from doing this right now because the cell sizes get too small and the possibility of re-identifying people gets too large. As a system like this gets more and more data from more and more places, we have the potential to slice and dice the data ever more finely while still maintaining the privacy and confidentiality protections that are necessary both ethically and under law for this kind of work. There are other things we could say. So this table, it's a complicated one, but I'll walk through it really quickly, gives us some sense of entrepreneurship. This is based on filings of an IRS form called the SS4. You file an SS4 when you want to get an employer identification number. If you want to found a company that wants to employ people and has to pay payroll taxes on them, you have to file an SS4. So this is a leading indicator of entrepreneurship. These are people employed in research at universities. The red bars are the number of SS4s they file, so plausibly the number of organizations they're trying to found. The green line is the total employment of those organizations. The blue line is the total payroll of those organizations. So these are small. They're about 1.5 person each on average, but these are new businesses from all industries. And what's interesting here is actually for me, it's a sad thing, but for the academic in me, it's a very nice piece of face validity. Earnings dropped dramatically starting in 2008, and employment doesn't drop that much, which means that these small firms did what other small firms do, we know they do in recessions, which is cut payroll in order to keep people on board. So this gives a possibility not just of thinking where do you get jobs in established companies, but who's starting new companies. And this is everybody. So if a medical resident works on an NIH grant and then starts up a sole practice, they're in here. If a skilled tradesperson is hired as a staff person on a big physics grant to do machining and they leave that grant and start up a contracting firm, they're in here. And this allows us to see all kinds of new flows out into the economy. This is, I have to do some testimonial. So this is a recent piece from Nature, which doesn't really speak directly to you all, but does give a sense of some of the benefit. This is an article about how you track returns to academic investments, and one of the things they note is that IRIS data allow observational experiments that can directly track how scientific training affects career trajectories and returns to industry. The reason it allows that is because when we have data from lots of different universities, there are a bunch of things about the way the universities structure their research that are exogenous, plausibly, to the outcomes that we see. Do you have an engineering school? Where on campus is it? Is it far away from the physics department or nearby to it? Is computer science in the arts and sciences, or is it in engineering? When was this university founded? The more institutions we have, the more possibility there are for the kinds of quasi-experimental designs that will actually start to let us untangle the causal effects of these kinds of investments on students and on others. And that's another reason to have a platform that is shared and that is trusted and that builds across multiple institutions, because to answer the kinds of questions we want to answer, we need to be able to go a little bit beyond associations. So what can we do with this? I'm going to go very fast through two research examples and then hopefully stop and have some questions. The first question is, what happens to doctoral students when they graduate? This is a paper we just recently published. It came out in the December issue of Science. We called it Wrapping It Up in a Person. This is a quote from Oppenheimer about the best way to send information. The answer is train somebody and send them out into the world. If you're in my world, you say something like the best form of technology transfer from a university is called graduation. The idea here is that we took these data from universities, we matched the data to ProQuest information on dissertations, which allowed us to identify the individuals in the data who completed a dissertation in a 3-year period. We then know the field they worked in, something from their abstracts about the topics, a bunch of other information. We know what was funding them, we know who they were working with, and we can, in the census data, see where they got their first job. And so this is an interesting thing to do. And this is what we found. So I've still got the embargoed sticker here. I need to update this, but sorry. First, about 40% of those doctoral students overall got jobs in industry, in the private sector. 57% got jobs in academia. Of the folks who were placed in industry, we were able to split between R&D performing firms, firms that claimed an R&D tax exemption, and non-R&D performing firms, which doesn't mean they weren't doing research, it just doesn't mean they claimed a tax exemption. And what's interesting here is that we can also see geography. So of the people who got doctorates while they were employed on, at least partially on research grants, and got jobs in R&D performing firms the year after they left, about 17% of them stayed in the state where they were employed. So this is very basic information, but it's something we don't know. We focused this paper around industrial jobs in large part because that's a black box. Graduate schools and graduate deans tend to be very good at tracking PhD students who leave for academia, but it tends to be very, very hard to keep track of the people who get jobs in industry. Surveys can do some of it, LinkedIn can do some of it, but the Census Bureau data offers the possibility for a more comprehensive approach that we haven't been able to see before. This is about where they go. So these universities are CIC institutions, which means they're overwhelmingly up here. And the color of the state represents the number of these people who went to this state when they got a job, right? Obviously, many of these are scientists and engineers, and they're being drawn dramatically to California. There are a lot of reasons to go to California, but that's one of them. We can also talk about how the firms differ. So the things that employ doctoral students pay more on average. This is the mean, this is the median. They're bigger. This is the mean, this is the median. Than either all the establishments that perform R&D in the US or all the establishments in the US. So this tells us something about the kinds of jobs people are getting. This is the distribution of wages for everybody in the US, the blue lines, for everybody in the US employed by an R&D performing firm, for the doctoral recipients in this sample. And this is a choppier distribution in part because there aren't as many of them. There are about 3,000 in the data. This is the industries they go to. So again, doctoral recipients, all employees, the difference. This is the top 10 most overrepresented industries. When people leave the university with a new doctorate in hand, having done some of their work on federally funded research, they overwhelmingly get jobs here, where you'd expect them to, in the core of the knowledge economy and the manufacturing high-tech economy. I didn't include it, but one of the other things that this allows us to do, something that we're starting to do in this example, is to think systematically about field effects. So in this paper, if you go look at it, we also ran a bunch of just descriptive regressions that tried to explain where people ended up based on the field where their degree was from, based on how many semesters of federal funding they had, all those kinds of things. And that allows us to start to see differences in the conditions of training related to these career outcomes. Another recent piece that I'm not an author on, but that came out of these data from the Census Bureau, did the same thing for male and female doctoral students in order to estimate a wage penalty. And they found something very interesting. Not surprising, but new female doctorates who get jobs in industry were paid about 31 cents less than male doctoral students. But almost all of that effect went away when we used data from the decennial census and the American Community Survey to identify which of those students had dependent children at home. It turns out that there's a parenting detriment, not necessarily a gender detriment, which means that there's possibilities for universities to improve those outcomes by addressing parenting, which is a potentially interesting thing. So the other thing we've done, and this is much more directly on your patch and much less well developed, is start to bring undergraduate learning data into this infrastructure. We've done some pilot work with transcript data from the University of Michigan, which I'm sure you've heard about and will continue to hear about in various ways. Stephanie, Tim, Ben, I see in the back there, and many others have been working on these. But this allows us to take transcript records and match them to the research data to identify the undergraduate students who at some point in their educational careers here at Michigan were paid employees of a federal research grant. Now that's interesting because lots and lots of work, probably work done by many people in this room, emphasizes the importance of high impact experiences on outcomes. One of those high impact experiences is research engagement, and this is a particularly high level form of research engagement because it's a job. It means you applied for and were selected by a faculty member to be an RA on a project. And when we do that, we can then start to try to model the effects of having a research experience on things like persistence to degree, choice of major, and, we're not there yet, but when we get out to the Census Bureau data, on the career outcomes and earnings. Do people with research experiences, are they more likely to work in research firms? Are they more likely to start firms? Does the type of research experience matter? Are social scientists who do research on poverty, for instance, more likely to go into nonprofits that do social service kind of work? What does it mean to have a research experience in comparative literature? Those aren't going to be funded, but we can also see those experiences through the transcript data for things like undergraduate research opportunities programs that allow us some interesting stuff. And so this is very preliminary, but what we did is we took a look from fall 2001 to winter 2014 at 112,000 odd students who were registered for classes. We identified those who were true freshmen, not transfers, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those true freshmen, about 20, somehow enrolled and never took a class. We don't know what happened to them. Be a really interesting question. Might not, but this is the beauty of big administrative data. You have to pound on it a lot to avoid the loopy learning analytics. And we were interested in those who started classes before winter 2010 to allow us a 5-year graduation rate to think about. So we're looking at about 51,000 students who we know were enrolled at Michigan. We know their transcript histories. We know whether or not they were paid employees on a research grant, whether or not they took the undergraduate research opportunities program class. And we're interested, we know a lot about their distribution. We can talk about their ACTs, their GPA. Low income flag here is basically based on Pell Grant status, race and ethnic, international, basic descriptives. We became interested in asking, okay, of the ones who started school at U of M, how many took a first class in STEM, which we defined as the first course in a STEM class sequence that they took. So we weren't taking into account here transfers. If you transferred in and skipped 101, we moved you on. This is one of the things that needs a lot of work on, and the kind of place where in something like the IRIS infrastructure, there would be great work for a node. Imagine we had transcript data and serious work could be done across universities to try to harmonize what an introductory course sequence was for a bunch of different majors that were of shared interest. Of the ones who took the first year STEM class, 31% went on to declare a major in a STEM field. This happens at our school, again, usually in the 5th semester, but that's one of the things that could allow us some leverage on causality because different schools have different major declaration requirements. And those are exogenous to the students. The students take that world as they find it. And I'm willing to bet, though it would be worth study, that no student chooses their university based on when they have to declare a major. Right. So there's interesting possibilities here. Of those 31%, 43% of men, but only 19% of women declare a STEM major. And then of those who declare at this university, which does very well, 97% graduate in 5 years in not just that STEM major, but a STEM major. We're using the ICE classifications here. And the difference between men and women kind of disappears. So if we want to start thinking about how we dive into making a change here, right, or understanding more, it looks like something about the transition from a first class to majoring is what's important. And we've been interested in how research experience of various types leads that. I'm not going to throw a lot of regression tables at you, but some stylized findings and directions for the future. So women are less likely to take an initial STEM class than men. We know this. A research class, a methods class, doesn't increase your likelihood of majoring. Research employment does increase your likelihood of majoring in STEM. But and this is in a matched difference in difference sample, but the effect is much, much stronger for white men than for everybody else. It's positive for everybody, but on the order of 5 or 6 times greater for white men than for, say, African American men, who are the lowest positive impact. Both research classes and research experiences before the major increase the likelihood of graduation for everybody. Research employment after the major, so people have research careers where they start in their freshman or sophomore year with something like Europe and then transition into paid employment. Those people have a really big bump on the likelihood of graduating in STEM, which suggests that we might want to do things like incentivize students to use their work-study funds to work in a lab rather than in the dining hall. The effect sizes are pretty dramatically variant by gender, race, and ethnicity, and we don't know why, but these data allow for some possibilities to start thinking about why. So some things we've been thinking about: selection, bias. It might be that people just simply aren't hired. Might be a lack of role models. We're doing some interesting work that tries to match the gender of the GSI or the race and ethnicity of the GSI, which is largely, again, exogenous at our university in a section to students' enrollment, because students don't know who their GSIs are generally when they enroll, to these outcomes. It allows us to see some of the things that might be going on with role modeling. They might have very different experiences in the lab. There are other things to think about. But the idea here is that this is a taste of what could be done with this kind of infrastructure, particularly as we get many universities and the implications for causal inference improve. And the next step would be to ask, what are the implications for the students' career outcomes when they leave the university? Not just at 1 year, but at 5 years, 10 years, provided we have the data. That's something we could do with the Census Bureau information that might allow us to see how the career of an English major or an art history major deviates from the career of a biology major. Right? Where are they ending up? What are they making? What kinds of industries do they work? How often do they change jobs? Can we relate any of those things to the kinds of treatments that an education in an institution like ours provides? So there are a bunch of possibilities for the future. What I wanted to stop with is to say, I think IRIS makes a really interesting model for thinking about data sharing in a robust but secure and confidential fashion for communities like this one. I'll just leave that there. We're starting to do that work, but there's a lot of work to be done in this. I spend much more time on the phone with offices of general counsel these days than I do writing these papers. That's why I'm in the middle of the author list on all of them. The census linkages create really, really, really interesting possibilities to think about students beyond graduation. My experience of reading the literatures in education is that we think very hard about GPA, time to degree, graduation, but we don't have the capacity, much as we never had the capacity to understand what happened to doctoral students when they left into industrial jobs, to think about what that education does in terms of what students do later. Right? We can do some of that with clearinghouse data, obviously. That works for graduate school and other places, but it doesn't get us everything we need to think about the range of jobs that people take. And as a result, we don't have the capability to talk as intelligently or effectively about what a university education does, not just for the student, but for society. Because we all know that university educations are very, very expensive things, both for the student and for society. I think there's also a huge degree to which a research community could benefit from this kind of model, and that's what we're trying to do with the science policy, economics and sociology of innovation, et cetera, groups. Having a shared data set that is improved by many hands, that allows for shared code, that allows for the development of common user-generated data that happens in a secure place, that is sustainable because it's supported not by an individual grant or an individual university, but on this NPR model by lots of institutions that are interested in this, raises all kinds of possibilities, both for avoiding us all having to create perfect data sets for our questions that don't speak to each other, and for the possibilities of things like replication and development of trends, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop there and ask what you think.
All right, so we've got some time for questions. Questions
And we don't have a tradition of hiring undergrads to work in research projects. But what we see in like computer science, students have jobs in their own industry on the side. Have you looked at anything like that?
We have not yet. Two interesting things. Part of that is that Iris itself is about 18 months old now. So the pilot work went back a couple of years. We're just starting to. The two things that are of interest in the census data related to this, one, there's the possibility of seeing employment before the university. So particularly for students who are coming back to the institution out of jobs that aren't like mine were, house painting or ditch digging. You can sort of see some of the effects. The other is to look at contemporaneous employment. That has all kinds of potentials, both for thinking about the positive case, which is an undergraduate computer science student who has a paid internship in the industry, but also for looking at the more challenging cases. A low-income student who's having to work 30 hours a week outside of the university in order to pay tuition.
So I love this, and I love the idea of collecting this kind of academic data about learning as well. And I think some of the outcomes of learning in public discourse are different.
Yep.
It's not the economy and jobs, well, that's a part, but as James talked about this morning, there's all these other positive benefits of learning that we have to go to. So that's kind of a comment. My question is, so I approach things with skepticism in mind. And you said a couple of times how Iris is helping universities leverage this data for the conversation. And, I'm curious, how do we know that we're not just saying what we want to hear, hacking our way through the data or digging for the right needles that we can show the government? I mean, we've got a vested interest. We want them to fund science, education, and students. How at a governance level do you see Iris being used by the senator to go and actually say, no, here's what I meant, cut out all of these investments, or by journalists to increase the diversity of people looking at that data?
Great comment and a really, really thorny question. So on the comment, absolutely, in some ways the economic impacts are low-hanging fruit because the data exists. So my interest for the research side is to be able to say things like federal funding of science gives us cleaner water, safer food, healthier children, education gives us better lives, more fulfilling lives, a more educated citizenry, things like that. That's one of the things for a research community that can use these kinds of data as a sort of a toll and ask what can port into them, what chain of islands can we build together. That's where I think the payoff will be in those terms. In terms of how these data are used, well, governance is a touchy issue. We're moving now from an initial steering committee based out of the 9 universities that started with us to a national governing board. The governing board oversees a bunch of things. The universities we work with very closely, and we bring them right now more descriptive data that they can use. At some level, one of our answers is we're a research organization. We'll tell you it looks like you've got an 8-ounce glass and there's about 4 ounces of liquid in it. You get to decide whether it's half full or half empty. Our job is to make sure that you have the ammunition to make that decision and that you understand how the data are created. In research terms, we work with journalists when they come and talk to us, Nature example, in much the same way that a press office or you all would. I think that the key here for actually ensuring that there's a robust and reliable stream of research is the idea of replicability in a community of users. So I think here of something like, in my field, the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, which has built a really robust community that knows the data very well and that can provide the kinds of skeptical review and response to these uses. That's much harder to do when everybody has and protects their own small tranche of data, to the extent that this also allows things like code sharing, information about how classifications are made and alternative classifications, shared weighting metrics, all of those kinds of things. We're going to have better science. Does that mean that people won't get it wrong? No, but I think that there's more benefit in trying to enable the community to develop around those ideas than there is in trying to shut it down and maintain a hold on it.
Over here on the side.
You mentioned you might look into adding additional data from maybe undergraduate students as they interact with materials online or something like that. What additional data sources do you think you might look into in the near future?
So my initial ante here would be to try to look at very basic information about the complete set of students from a number of universities, and then to branch out from there into more complete transcript kinds of data that could allow us to understand more. We simply don't know systematically across a bunch of different campuses things like where geographically do students go and how does their major or their home, their origin address, are they in-state, out-of-state, international, shape that. There are all kinds of ways this could expand, and part of the model, the reason we have this sort of core facility in one place, but the idea of the nodes or the partners, is that as interests in the community grow, there are possibilities to add new data, provided they're approved by our governing board and covered in the scope of our MOUs with the institutions, that might do more in different things. So in my world, for instance, science policy, there's a group now that's starting to pilot test linking some of these data to tax information about nonprofit organizations, so we can see what the contribution to the nonprofit sector is more easily. There's some early discussions about whether things like GitHub repositories can be linked back to individuals in order to think about the creation of code as an outcome of education in some fields. So I'm thinking very meat and potatoes right now, but I think to the extent that we can build the platform and critically get the institutional arrangements right, I think more becomes possible. It's very important here to go slow to go fast in terms of getting institutions and researchers used to how we have to work with the data.
I mean, one of the features of these data sets that make them possible to bring together in the Irish world is that they are fairly uniform across institutions. The research expenditure data was legislated to be uniform. Student record data is reasonably uniform because it's transferred, it's used for transferring students from one place to another. So I think if we look for where we could find the first places for this, it would be in places where we are using reasonably uniform systems. So for example, learning management systems. If there are a number of institutions using the same learning management system, it might be quite conceivable to gather together data about student usage of that, bring it together with information, all the rest of the information about students in this kind of one. In the back, yes. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about the disciplines that don't have RHs and the institutions that aren't research institutions, so the primarily teaching institutions. I know you probably haven't got them in the set yet, but if there are going to be statements made about the importance of an RA-ship in undergraduate education, then it has the potential, say, if you find it in the research institutions, maybe you should implement it in places that don't have that. But just what's your thoughts about disciplines that don't have RA-ship, women's studies, humanities?
Yep. So this is, like I said, I'm a sociologist, and the vast majority of my field wouldn't show up in these data. Two things. One, we started with research because there was a pressing need for that, and there was already the beginnings of a movement around it in the federal government. I would love to have data on research from all of the institutions that do any research, but it becomes prohibitive below a certain level of research to involve them. I think that's one of the things that starting to think more systematically about student data could allow. There are reasons why you might expect a 4-year institution not to want to join this when they're doing $1.2 million of federally funded research, but they might really want to when they do these other things. I think bringing in the transcript data also has the possibility to let us start to think about the non-federally funded fields. Questions like, who's got a GSI? Who's on fellowship? We know for graduate students that they're supported in lots of different ways, and that allows us to do it. Without data from non-research intensive universities, we can't do much to compare just yet. And again, back to the question about, are we just p-hacking our way to a good story? We're also worried about the possibility that we create, with findings here that aren't properly contextualized, incentives for policies that won't work in lots of places. I think we can get at some of that with judicious comparisons. So, the question we're asking about the difference between a research class and a paid research experience can get us some way, but it doesn't get us to the institutional difference. We're never going to be able, despite my fondest fevered dreams, to put all the data together under one roof. I think Tim shares some of this aspiration, but to the extent that we can start to engage institutions whose primary interest isn't going to be in their federally funded research portfolio, we'll be able to do more.
All right, I think we've run out of time, so we're going to thank Jason again. And if you have questions about Iris and so on, it's easy to find them online, and you can also feel free to ask me to make some connections for you.
Yep, and I'll hang around for a little bit. Sadly, I have another meeting in about half an hour, but if y'all have got a break. No, you don't have a break.
We don't have a break. Right?
No break. All right. In that case, I will simply shut down my thing and hand back my mic. Thank you.
Our next presentation for the morning is our first panel. And this panel is going to be given by two of our colleagues from here at Michigan, Barry Fishman and Rachel Niemer. And they've selected as a topic, go ahead. All right. They've selected as a topic, avoiding loopy learning analytics. If we don't change the direction we're headed, we'll end up where we're going. So let me give a brief introduction to these two colleagues, people I've worked with a lot over recent years. Rachel is currently the Director of Digital Pedagogy and Learning Communities at the Office of Digital Education and Innovation. She is formerly the Assistant Director of our Center for Research on Learning and Teaching. Rachel came to us with a PhD in chemistry from Caltech in 2007. She did her undergraduate work at Bowdoin College before that. She has worked extensively on developing communities of practice around thinking about the use of data in teaching and learning, and recently has been spending a lot of time acting as a translator, working across the many different disciplines we have on our campus, a real expert in doing that kind of work. Barry Fishman is the Arthur F. Thurnau Professor of Learning Technologies here at the University of Michigan in the School of Information and the School of Education. His research focuses on video games as models for learning environments and for teacher learning, and of the role of technology in supporting teacher learning and the development of scalable things. He's done a lot of work on design-based implementation research, which he helped to establish. They're going to talk a little bit, I assume, about the Gradecraft system, which he is co-creator of in an award-winning game-inspired learning environment. He currently is the Director of Undergraduate Studies in the Bachelor of Science in Information program and serves as the Chair of the Digital Innovation Advisory Group for the Office of Digital Education and Innovation. Please join me in welcoming Rachel and Barry to the stage.
So our title, which seems to have caught a bit of attention, is Avoiding Loopy Learning Analytics. If we don't change the direction we are headed, we'll end up where we are going. And our approach to this is thinking about how different pedagogies may lead us to need to think about different data analytic processes. I want to start with some acknowledgments. First and foremost, Caitlin Holman is the co-creator of Gradecraft, which I'll show you in just a moment. She's a graduate student in the School of Information and is really one of the intellectual and technical leads on the project we're going to talk about. Mika Lavacamonte, Tim McKay, Stephanie Teasley, two of the two program chairs as well as other faculty members, and then the rest of the team, which is quite enormous. I want to call special attention to the Learning Analytics Task Force, Office of Digital Education and Innovation, and the Digital Innovation Greenhouse within that, and the UM Office of Provost. They have provided significant financial support for the work and the tool that we'll talk a little bit about today. So you've heard the word Gradecraft tossed out by Tim and by me. This is an alternative learning management system. It takes the elements of what we know works for motivating people to play games and applies them to is a system that allows instructors to navigate using those pathways. And Barry will talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to give you a highlight that we're going to be talking about this tool and the data that comes from it very briefly at the end. And in particular, I want to show one of the features of this, which is the grade predictor. So this is a tool within the LMS where learners can go in, predict how they might do on different assignments and assessments, and see how that'll impact their grade. And so this, how learners interact with this particular tool, is an interesting way to think about how they're approaching their learning. So I also want to provide a little caveat about what we're talking about today. We're not going to talk in detail about the data or about specific analytical techniques. But what we are going to do is hopefully open your mind to ways that you need to think about the pedagogy and the intent, the type of learning that is intended in a given context. So when you think about analytics to measure, we hope this session helps broaden the range of things you might choose as your focus.
So that's our job, is to try to expand the range of things that we all think about when we think about learning. Everyone in the room is interested in data and analytics. That comes along with the landscape, and we are all also interested in learning. But not everybody spends a lot of time immersed in thinking about learning from a theoretical or pedagogical perspective. So we wanted to try and help you think about different ways that you might think about learning and different ways that you might think about teaching, and to really problematize for ourselves those two terms. Because it's easy to talk about these, but what do we mean when we talk about them? Because if you don't problematize these terms, our claim is that you might end up stuck in a loop, where you end up reinforcing the kinds of learning that is already going on, when what you might want to do is actually stimulate something else. You might want to take the institution, you might want to take individual courses, you might want to take your own learning in a slightly different direction. So that would require, we claim, a different way to think about learning and teaching. But let's think about this term learning first. So a deceptively simple word, we think we know what it means, but there are lots of different ways that you might use that word that would cause some variation in what you would look for when you're looking at data. So here are 4 different ways that we often think about learning in very different frames. And depending on the frame you pick, you would look for very different kinds of things. So for instance, a change in response to stimuli or a change in observable behavior. Classic behaviorist way to think about learning. Often when we talk about log file data, when we talk about kinds of interactional data, that's kind of what we have, right? We don't really know what the user was thinking, but we do know what they did. We could observe it. Second, a change in mental structures, the rise of cognitive science. What's going on inside a learner's head? Well, once you start to think from a cognitive frame, you really broaden the range of things you start to look for. And you're interested, of course, in what the observable behavior is, but you're also looking for something else. You're starting to try and interpret that observable behavior and bring it to some different kind of understanding about what might be going on that is frankly not directly observable. Practical. The acquisition of new knowledge and skills, importantly, the second part of this is I think, key, that you can apply when you need to apply them. So that's a very training-oriented mindset, a notion of preparation for something coming down the road, or as our colleagues at Stanford, Dan Schwartz and John Bransford say, preparation for future learning. Very important also, but very different than the first two, right? There's something else going on that you might want to look for. And finally, learning how to learn, right? The ability to be increasingly sophisticated in how you interact with the world around you. That's another valid definition of learning. But if you look across these 4, there are 4 very different things being described. And if you were to say to yourself, well, what would I look for in data that would help me understand these 4 things? You would come up with 4 very different sets of things to look for. Here's another thing to think about when you're thinking about learning, which is what are people learning? What's the content? So this is a combination of multiple different descriptions of so-called 21st century learning or 21st century skills. This comes from a National Research Council report published a few years ago. The synthesis of these reports and presentation in this format comes from my colleague Chris Deedy and myself. And I was actually presenting this a few years ago in a seminar taught by our current provost, Martha Pollack, on how the university operates. And she was interested in this new idea of the massive open online course and what are the implications of MOOCs for education. And I came to her class and started talking about these ideas. And she pointed out, she said, you know, it occurs to me that these first four things are the things that we're pretty good at in school, or at least we think we're pretty good at in school, whether K-12 or higher education. But all the rest of these are things that are a little harder to get at and that we often like to say we're preparing students for, but we're not quite sure how good a job we do, and we have a much harder time measuring them and instrumenting them in our courses with our evaluations. So this, to me, is an open field day for all of us in this room. Right? If you're interested in any of these other elements of learning, how would you go about measuring them? What would you look for? How would you design experiences to try to promote them? And one more frame from somebody who's very popular in these parts and maybe in your part of the world too. This is John Seely Brown. John Seely Brown, a computer scientist, a cognitive scientist, a leader of Xerox PARC for many years, where much of what we consider modern computing was invented, frankly. John Seely Brown has dedicated the latter part of his career to thinking about learning and organizational transformation of learning, and he talks about three different frames or three different sort of evolutionary stages of high-performance learning environments. And you begin with learning about stuff, the facts of the world. That's what we mostly do in schools. We learn about things. When we do a really good job, we're learning to do things. So we're learning particular skills and how to apply them. That might be that third level I talked about when it comes to learning, which is learning new skills and learning when they're useful and when to apply them. But the highest goal, and one we very rarely reach, is learning to become. So becoming STEM professionals, becoming scientists, becoming scholars, becoming doctors, becoming lawyers, becoming whatever it is that we're in school that we think we're leading towards. There's something beyond the mere facts and the mere application of knowledge and skills that is about being in that community, being in that field. And that's another, this frame again is something you could think about when you're looking at what you think the outcomes in an environment are supposed to be. All right, so we set this up with that Chinese proverb, if we don't change the direction we're headed, we'll end up where we were going, which I love, both because who doesn't love a good tautology, and also because it does talk to this notion of loopiness, right? That ending up back where we started inadvertently when we thought we were starting a new course off somewhere. But this requires me to stereotype something, which is what we mean when we talk about business as usual. So now I beg your forgiveness while we stereotype higher education. But I think you recognize something in this stereotyping of what we mean by usual. So this is what we might claim is a typical kind of assessment frame, a typical kind of frame that generates data for us as people interested in learning analytics about how people are doing in a course, what people are learning in a standard learning experience. And of course, there's lots of variations on this. So you'll say yes, but what if there's no exams and just papers? So all those variations as caveats. This is still, we think, sort of business as usual. And this is what our students come to expect also when they think about, when somebody sends you an email if you're an instructor and says, well, what's the workload in this class? They're asking about this. They want to know, how are these elements used in your class and how do you array them? All right, well that begs the question, what do we mean when we talk about something different? Well, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. And these are things that may, in your context, not seem all that unusual. And maybe they aren't that unusual. So things like an apprenticeship, in fact, is one of the oldest forms of teaching and learning known to humanity. Our great colleague at Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh and other places have done lots of work in terms of coming up with new ways to implement tutoring, cognitive tutors, which I think is one of the longest running learning analytics applications out there. So maybe that's not that unusual, but it is different than what we do when we think about sort of mass higher education. Laboratory-based work, competency-based or outcomes-based frames on education, field experiences, things like field experiences when you're learning how to be a teacher, learning how to be a nurse, learning how to do work in agricultural sciences, and then something that we call gameful pedagogy, which is the one you're perhaps least familiar with. So it's the one we're going to spend time orienting you to today, and then we're going to turn it back around to you and open it up to have you think about various experiences you've had that may not be the usual, which could include any of these, of course, to help think about what you might look for in a learning analytics frame that would be different. So let's model that for you first we're going to inform you a little bit about gameful pedagogy, and then we'll talk about things we look for when we're looking to understand how people learn in gameful frames, and then we're going to turn it back to you. All right, so first, why games? Why am I focused on games as part of my research agenda and as part of learning, and why do I have, why does this thing Gradecraft exist? All these different things are perfectly valid questions that my mother regularly asks me. And my explanation is that a well-designed game is something that actually does something that I think a well-designed learning experience does, right? It gets you engaged. It appeals to something innate about your curiosity, something you want to have accomplished, something you want to learn, something you want to discover. And it encourages people to take risks. And that's maybe the most important thing in learning, I would think, is taking a risk, doing something that you're not familiar with in order to go someplace new. And this is really the most interesting thing about games, and this is an observation made by a colleague of ours at MIT named Eric Klopfer, is that people play games because they're hard, not despite the fact that they're hard. Games, sports, I mean, think about all the different endeavors of play. People choose to do hard things, not easy things. Now, when's the last time a student came to you during office hours and asked what the hardest thing they could do next was? Right? That's not how school is often framed. And that's a thing that we're working to change with gameful learning. Many people, when we start talking about gameful learning, say, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Gamification, like frequent flyer programs, or if you're another S&H, screen stats. So that is a cousin of the ideas we're talking about. These idea of points and badges and rewards and leaderboards, those are all the superficial features of games that sometimes are used in various kinds of learning or other business transactions to encourage people to do the thing that you want them to do. But these are just the superficial elements of games and not actually the underlying mechanics that we're so interested in. If all you did was add points and badges and rewards to your teaching, that's not what we call gameful learning, although you might justifiably refer to that as gamification. But we're going somewhere else here. And there's some reasons for that. One is we think appeals to simple, superficial elements are shallow, and students see right through them, right? So here's you might call this a gamified calculator. I'm not sure why it exists, but it does. And anyway, it's unnecessary because people already know that math is kind of a weird game, and there are weird rules that you have to play along with. So we're going beyond that, all right? So let's show you something a little bit deeper. These are some of the attributes that we find are part of compelling and well-designed games. This work comes from Jim G. And many other scholars, but Jim G. wrote perhaps the most eloquent summation of these ideas in a book that came out a long time ago now, like 2003, called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. And there are many, many more elements of well-designed games that G points out. These are 6 that we find particularly useful in our work. So one, a clear goal. When you start playing a game, you know why you're playing the game. You know what you're there for, what your goal is. Now, often there may be a surprise or a switch, but think about a learning environment. If you didn't know what you were there to learn or what the point of it was, you're going to have a little trouble connecting to it. Multiple routes. Good games allow students to make some choices along the way, all players to make choices along the way. Good learning environments also have multiple pathways because different things appeal to different people at different times. So in the learning analytics world, we talk a lot about personalization. This is one interpretation of that personalization idea, that we want to provide people different routes through a space. A really well-designed game encourages explanation. How many people in the room spend way too much time playing games? Yes, okay, thank you for being honest. At the end of the level, those of you who are avid gamers, most of the time, what do? You just go on to the next level? Or do you go back and replay the level you just finished, looking for things you might have missed, right? Really trying to understand that system. Well, a successful gamer, I see some nods in the audience, that's what you do. You're actually trying to unpack the way that game is designed in order to exploit that knowledge for later. Boy, wouldn't it